Why the banks need a clear formal operating instructions? Because this kind of formal operating instructions is not required for all businesses, but when it comes to banks, there is an absolute need for clear and formal operating instructions. Why? Because banks has got certain peculiar features. So this peculiar features or peculiar characteristics of the bank would make them different from commercial enterprises or other commercial enterprises, and the banks are exposed to lot of exceptional risk. So it becomes necessary for the bank to establish and have a formal operating procedures, so they can have what are the defined limits for every individual discretion, that is, we give what is the power up to which each and every individual can act, and the formal operating procedure can implement rigorous internal control system. Okay, so I told you that banks has got certain peculiar features or characters, and only because of that they need a clear or formal operating instruction. So what are the peculiar features? Let's see example one by one. Number one, if you look at the bank, they are going to have large volume of cash, because they'll have custody of large volume of cash, or for that matter any monetary items, maybe in the form of negotiable instruments, in the form of securities. So these monetary items would involve or would require physical security. Okay, so they would require physical security. And why we need this physical security? For both the storage purposes as well as whenever they are transferred. Okay, so this makes banks very vulnerable to frauds, because the bank is directly dealing with the monetary items, so banks are very much vulnerable to frauds. Number two, if you take banks, there are going to be large number of transactions, and that too involving large amounts. The transactions are going to be in large number and the amount is also going to be large. So this makes the accounting to be very complex. So in banking there will be complex accounting, and to take care of the complex accounting there should be a vigorous internal control system. So in banking now what happening is manual operations are replaced by technology driven processes. Okay, so this has actually removed the manual interventions. So now what we have to do is we have to ensure that there are more checks to avoid frauds. Okay, number three, if you take banks, the transaction initiation, the recording, management, if you look at all those, they are going to be happening in different locations. It is possible that transaction can be initiated in one location, recorded in another location, and managed in different locations. Okay, so that is one peculiar feature. And fourth one, if you look at banks, they generally operate through geographically dispersed network. They'll have a pan-country presence, or they'll have branches in various countries. So banks are basically a geographically dispersed wide network of branches and departments, and they will also have foreign offices. So this means that there should be a greater decentralization of authority and control functions. Only then these branches can function. Okay, but what is the side effect? This results in difficulties in maintaining uniform accounting practices and accounting systems. Okay, and the fifth peculiar feature of the bank is that the bank will deal with a lot of non-fund based commitments. Okay, it will be in the form of LCs, BGs. Now these items are basically off balance sheet items, so they may not involve accounting entries, so it becomes difficult to detect if there is going to be any fraud. Okay, then comes the sixth one. If you take the transactions happening at ATMs, okay, if you take transactions happening at ATMs, what happens is the completion of the transaction is directly done by the customer. It may be over the internet or mobile banking or through ATMs. So this is a peculiar feature because transaction is full and fully done by the customer without the intervention of the bank. Okay, then the seventh peculiar feature is the banks are basically linked to the national and international settlement system, so that could pose a systemic risk. So understand, these are all the peculiar features of the banks, so there is an absolute need to have a clear formal operating instruction.